If you want to see America's future as it pertains to electric vehicles, look to the east. Hi, I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. This episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, I saw a story today, I believe it was in the Wall Street Journal, but I may be mistaken about that, about the problems with electric vehicles in China. And those problems are that inventory continues to grow as subsidies from the government to buy those cars are slashed and people are not buying them. They are, at the same time, the government is mandating that companies make them and increase production of them. And I just thought, gentlemen, that it was a perfect picture of this issue that we're constantly talking about when it comes to free markets and government interference in those free markets that usually come in one of two major forms. One is mandates to do something. In this case, in China, it's production of more electric vehicles. And the other is subsidies designed to induce you to do something. In this case, to buy more electric vehicles. And in both cases, they're finding that that is running into a brick wall. And we're seeing some of the same early signs here in the United States. Tesla has had to reduce pricing on some of its vehicles. And they are, the Wall Street Journal board is forecasting that the same thing that's happening there is going to happen here. But guess who's going to pay for it? People who buy gasoline-powered vehicles in the United States, because the companies, the big three primarily and others that also produce gasoline-powered vehicles have to make up their losses on the electric vehicles in some way. And so that means higher prices for the kind of cars that most people want to buy. Stephen Green, I don't know that there is a more vivid way of explaining to people how this system works. Because in general, Steve, I think people say, well, isn't it good that if you want more of something, you should subsidize it by giving tax breaks to people? And therefore, it's a good thing that we have more electric cars because it's good for the environment, it's innovation, it's exciting, it provides some American jobs. Shouldn't we want the government to subsidize this kind of behavior? China notwithstanding, Steve, is there an argument against the U.S. government getting more active, or California for that matter, getting more active in subsidizing the production of or the sales of electric vehicles?
Yeah, who is this we, Kimosabe? Certainly not me. Oh man, the thing is, you said that in the future the buyers of gasoline cars are going to have to pay for these subsidies. The fact is, we already are. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal this morning about, then we're taping this on Tuesday, on how just unaffordable new cars are becoming. The average price of a new car is now $48,000. There's only one car for sale in this country under $20,000, like 1999, and it's a Mitsubishi Mitsubishi sells 7 cars a year in this country now. 7 cars. That's not much.
Bring back the Yugo.
And that's not much of an exaggeration. They sell one model and it sells literally in the tens. In any case, the measure that stuck in my head of just how unaffordable traditional cars have become, internal combustion engine cars have become, is before the pandemic, it costs, this is again from the Wall Street Journal story, it costs 33 weeks of wages or 33 months of wages or weeks? I can't remember the figure now. I knew I should have taken notes. It takes 33 paychecks, I believe, full paychecks to pay off the value of a new car pre-pandemic. Now it's up to 42. So it's increased by almost a third in 3 years. This is far faster than the rest of the rate of inflation. Some of that is due to supply chain issues on just getting enough computer chips to run everything. So you need the low-tech processors that come out of China, and it's just been a mess with their lockdowns and everything. But we're already paying for these subsidies through these higher vehicle prices. And as a commenter reflected on this story that I read this morning, it's also inflating the prices of used cars because people don't want to buy these electric vehicles in the numbers that Washington is and California and other places are requiring that they be built and sold in. And so used car values are staying very, very high, because if you can't afford a new car and you don't want an electric vehicle, you've got to go to the used car market to get that gasoline or diesel engine that you want.
Right.
And so we're in this impossible situation where we have regulated cars with these CAFE standards and whatnot to try and bring them up to amazing efficiency levels, so you can't afford it. Meanwhile, we're trying to bring down the price of electric vehicles to a point where they're affordable. We can't even do that. If we would just let the damn market work and people take their preferences, we would get to a place where more electric vehicles are being sold at an affordable rate, because that's what free markets do, absent market warping subsidies, and people would still be able to afford the traditional cars that they actually want. And at this point, we've just got the worst of both worlds, and if there's a quicker way to sum up government intervention in the economy, I don't know what it is.
Bill, do you think it's a little bit crazy on my part to be making this analogy between communist China and the way we do things here in the United States? After all, we don't have nearly the kind of command and control government that they have. Yes, they're doing similar things with government subsidies. We can't really mandate production, but there are mandates that basically say by such and such year you must have X percentage of your cars being renewable resource kind of vehicles. I forget what the term they use for that under those standards. Is it just not a fair comparison on my part to hammer the United States on issues around subsidies and mandates?
No, it's 100% fair. That's what totalitarian states do in order to engineer societies in the direction that they want them to go. And I think electric cars are just a great example of this. The cattle prod behind this is we must save the planet, the dying planet. And so with that behind every single element of every single product ever made, green, the planet's going to die if you don't buy this electric car. We're all going to, I can't remember whether we're going to burn first or drown, but it was one of those two. So you've got a society-wide shared belief now in doomsday if you don't do X according to whatever people are wanting you to do. But the one thing that we can talk about now that we couldn't talk about even 5 years ago, because up until several years ago, electric cars were such a novelty that you couldn't really get a serious handle on what their impact is. You know, they're just weird things driven by weird people. And I think the short form about electric cars is that they're actually pretty good for urban environments, or at the very most suburban environments. In other words, if you don't drive more than 25 or 30 miles a day and you can charge your car at home, then they're convenient. But in terms of anything that requires long distance travel on the road, forget about the range.
Or towing.
The recharge time is 45 minutes, 50 minutes, you know, and I've often thought it'd be interesting to see how people would think about things if the electric car had come first, and now somebody says along, oh, wait a minute, we found this stuff in the ground, and if you put it in your car, you don't need to be charged electrically, and you can go 400 miles. 400 miles, that's insane. Well, we just carry the energy with you. Well, do you have to ship this stuff in? Is it radioactive? No, you just pump it out. Just pump it in like water. People would be quite amazed by that. Yeah. And so was it? It's 400 miles. That must take 2 hours to recharge, to refuel that thing. No, it's about 8 minutes. This drive to electric cars is a drive towards urbanization. It's a drive. It is a societal mandate to not be able to go where you want to go and just hit the road. I'd love to say that this was just a one-off, but when you combine this with all of the UN's, what is it, Century 21? That's a real estate company. The Vision 21 thing, where everybody's going to be living in cities and we're going to all have public transportation. Agenda. I think electric cars are a halfway house between real cars and public transportation.
Yep. Yeah, you can't. A social credit scheme doesn't work if people can just get in their car and drive wherever they want to. You got to force them onto the bus. You got to force them onto the train.
Pay cash for gas and go. Yeah. Yes. So there is no explanation for it, Scott. And of course, while people think, "Oh, I'm driving an electric car," well, so I'm not contributing to carbon footprint. Well, there's a fairly good chance the electricity that you're driving your car on is you may be driving a coal-powered car. And almost certainly you are driving an oil-powered car because that's where the electricity comes from. So none of it makes sense, and all of it is artificial. And yes, it's exactly like China. It is the government with an agenda using legislation to force businesses to do things that don't make any sense for them economically. I don't know how much money they've lost on electric trucks, which to me is insanity. But I've heard it's billions of dollars of electric trucks that have been built and are just simply not selling, can't give them away.
You can't work with them. They don't tow, they don't haul.
Well, of course not. Of course not. And the final thing I'll say about this is, right now, people can at least justify themselves to some degree by saying, well, at least I can charge my car for free. I go down to Whole Foods and there's a charging station and I just plug my car in. But if you think that when the entire country is electrified, that you're going to be able to charge your car for free, that they're just going to have nothing but these power stations for you to plug in and just charge, no. And all you need to know about electric cars is California mandated, 2030 or 2035, all cars must be electric sold in this
new registrations,
state. Yeah. And 2 days later, they said you're going to have to prepare to turn down the air conditioning because we don't have the electric grid to support what we've got now. We did a show where we said that somebody did an analysis, and they said if you're going to have an all-electric transportation fleet, we have to start building 1 gigawatt energy stations every 4 days, or some insane thing like that, right? So it's not going to happen. The question is, what are they going to do when it doesn't happen?
Yeah, the company in Texas that is responsible for energy has repeatedly in the last several weeks asked Texans to dial back their use of electricity because of the temperature being above 100 degrees for a long time, and we definitely need to conserve energy. And we got a lot of Teslas here, I'll tell you that. And so let me just tell you how I see this. First of all, in the Wall Street Journal story, they said some 400 Chinese electric vehicle companies have gone under in recent times because of this dichotomy of the demand not keeping up with the mandates and the people, despite the subsidies, people are not buying them. So anyway, there are a lot of companies going under, and I have no problem with companies in a truly free market failing to compete effectively and going under as a result of that. But when they're essentially induced to go into a business that they otherwise wouldn't do if they had to take the risk on their own or share the risk with voluntary investors, the government is essentially tricking them into doing something that the government thinks that people should want. But people don't want anything other than what people want. And that's the problem with government. They think that we should want things, but wanting doesn't work that way. I had a neighbor when I lived in Pennsylvania who had this cute little car, and on the side of it, it said 0 emissions. And I told my wife that I always wanted to sneak over there at night with a magic marker and scribble on there, emissions from the smokestack, not the tailpipe.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what 0 emissions means. In any case, let me just say, I want a Tesla. I think some of these new electric vehicles, the Rivian pickup truck, are very cool. I want one of those too. I just watched a video by my favorite tech reviewer, Marquez Brownlee at MKBHD on YouTube, and he's reviewing this $2.4 million rocket ship electric car that in one day broke like 24 standing records for speed and acceleration and braking and all this kind of stuff.
Torque is amazing.
It can go,
they have to limit it or else they'll break your neck.
And it can go from 0 to 250 miles an hour and back to 0 in less than 30 seconds. It goes from 0 to 60 in less than 2 seconds. I think it was like 1.74 seconds. I mean, basically, the speed of this vehicle is restrained only by the capacity of your vertebra to not snap.
Yeah, yep.
So all of that to say, I think electric cars are some of the coolest things that are happening right now in technology, and I would love to have one. But not because I want some sort of government subsidy, or not because I think that somehow mystically this is going to save the planet in a way that nothing else can. I don't believe any of that. You know, when I read the story in the Wall Street Journal about this problem with mandates and subsidies and the people not responding appropriately and companies going under and stuff like this, for some reason it reminded me of tomatoes. And tomatoes are really peculiar. If you've ever planted tomatoes, you will see this. If you just leave the tomato plant to its own, it will produce an adequate supply of tomatoes for you for a while, and it's very useful. But people aren't satisfied with an adequate supply of tomatoes, and so they build this cage around the tomato vines to support the tomatoes, and you kind of tie the plant to it loosely, and then it grows bigger than it normally would if it were just kind of laying on the ground and burdened by the weight of the tomatoes. And then this thing becomes like an unbelievable tomato machine that just cranks out more tomatoes than you know what to do with. And you got to go to work with a basket of tomatoes every 2 days and give them away to your colleagues because you don't know what to do with all the tomatoes. But the problem is, if you took the cage off of the tomato vine, it would just collapse to the ground, and some of the tomatoes would rot because they would be laying on the ground, and it just, it wouldn't work as well. And I think when government tries to jump in and help, even if it's from the best motivations, it's essentially like building that cage around the tomato vine. But the problem is the cage won't always be there. It can't always be there. It's not always going to be effective. And at some point, the government's going to say, like the government of China is, well, we can't really support all this anymore. We've got other problems to deal with. And then the plant just kind of collapses and the tomatoes rot on the ground. I don't know if there's a way to persuade people who they make an equivalency between, like if I say I don't think the government should subsidize electric cars or mandate the manufacture of electric cars, they think I'm against innovation, against electric cars, against the environment, against all this kind of stuff. It's like, no. I think that we are going to develop some really great smoking hot electric vehicles, and I would like to own one of those at some point. But if you get the government involved in it, you are distorting the actual motivations of individuals, and you're setting up a false expectation that's bound to collapse when the government is no longer able to do what it said it would do, or changes what it wants to do because some new hot thing came along, because suddenly somebody figured out a way to suck energy out of hydrogen, and so that's the new thing, and forget about the electric vehicles. Now we're going to do hydrogen vehicles. So just let people decide. It's not let the markets decide. The markets, I hate to quote Mitt Romney in this, but markets are people. Markets are individuals. They're not some mass amalgam. And if you let individuals decide whether they want to start a company to make electric vehicles or whether they want to buy an electric car, then that will help keep prices under control. That will keep companies from racing ahead too rapidly beyond their resources and then suddenly collapsing when demand collapses. It's just one of those things that I think we can't repeat too often, because the more we go down this pathway of letting a few people at a remote capital decide what we want, the more we're going to wind up with things we don't want, and the less we'll be able to get things we really do. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.